the essence of Agile. And if time permits, I'll talk a little bit about Scrum as well. And the information that I've got from Teshan is actually, if you look at the audience, I think we have students from year 1 and students from year 4. That means we have the whole spectrum of students. So I'll try to be a little bit simpler, and I'll try to be a little bit abstract and try to explain the stuff on Agile. But if you really need further information, if you really need deep down information, just shout out, just ask questions. And depending on the questions that you ask, the topic might slightly vary as well, but that's perfectly fine. I mean, if you do not ask questions, what's going to happen would be like, I'll just finish this session in like, 30, 40 minutes or even 1 hour, and you can just go back to whatever you have been doing before this session. But again, it's totally up to you to decide whether it's really worth or not. If it's worth, then you really need to ask questions and get things clarified. And I mean, if you really want to get a kind of a snapshot of how industry works, and if you really want to understand, what are the challenges that you could face when you join the industry, this would be the ideal place for you to ask questions and get those things clarified. But if you know those answers, if you are not, if you do not care about knowing those answers, then it's fine as well. But again, I'm just rephrasing the same thing. The whole purpose of having today's session would be to have an interactive session so that you get the chance to ask questions, and I will also get the chance to answer the question that you have, rather than just me putting up some set of slides and information, because information can be found in the internet at any given time. What is important would be to maybe get some clarifications on the information that is out there in the internet. So that's what that would be the purpose of this particular session. Okay. Again, I mean, when we move on also, like, I will have lots of questions. I mean, again, there are no right or wrong answers for the questions. I mean, maybe, let's say if I ask like whether it's gonna rain, you can just say yes or no, right? I mean, there's no right or wrong thing. So just feel free to, answer questions, and that is really, really needed as well. Okay, just to start things off, how many of you are familiar with the concept of information systems and, systems, for example? Do you know what a system is? Do you have some kind of idea about what an information system is?
So you need a definition of information system or system.
I really don't need the definition, but if you can just explain in your own words, just explain what a system is, that would be good for that. It doesn't have to be precise, that's fine.
System is things that help for get some answers and have some problems to solve.
Right, okay, right. Then I'll just move on to the concept of information system. Can you just give an example of information system? If I rephrase the question again, can someone give me an example?
Student management system.
Student management system, that's good, very good, thanks. Anyone else who has a different answer, or maybe another example?
Enterprise system.
Enterprise system, thanks, yeah, good. Then probably know, a kind of high level idea about what a system is, right? And when it comes to software development, like, I mean, we talk a lot about different concepts, like, maybe, programming to, networks to security to, there are so many elements that comes together with the concept of software development, right? And then there's this particular kind of boring topic which is called the software development, or other software engineering, or other software development processes, like things like systems analysis and design. And it's mainly focusing on the different processes, right? And probably you'd have heard about things like waterfall methodology, spiral methodology, prototyping, extreme programming. There are so many different software development processes. And the question that I have to you is like, just take any context, just take any business, any enterprise. The question that I have is like, I mean, there has to be some kind of a way of working, right? The question is like, I mean, if you take any kind of a context, any business, why do you think that we need to have a way of working, some kind of a way of working? Any thoughts from anyone? It can be anything, right? There are different processes, right? I mean, what I'm more concerned is about what would be the purpose of having processes? What would be the purpose of having these kind of definitions on how we should be doing the certain things? What's the purpose of it?
To minimize casualties.
To minimize casualties, yes, true. Thank you very much. That's a really good answer, because I mean, depending on what the business is, yeah, just to minimize casualties. It can be lives, it can be resources, it can be people, it can be goods, Whatever. Yes, good. Anything else?
Sir, to achieve our goals.
To achieve our goals. Thank you, Dimtu. Yeah, that's good. Can you just elaborate a little bit? What do you mean by achieving our goals?
So we all have goals. Some
Right.
we just got a job and we have to something or ස්ථාවර වෙන්න වගේ idea ගන්න sir.
හොඳයි. Good. Right. Thank you, Dimtu. හරි තේරුණා. හොඳයි. Good answer. Anything else?
Ensure the quality of the product.
Ensure the very good. Ensure the quality of the product. So if you really want to make a good product, I mean, we sell products and then we earn money as a business, right? Then we need to ensure the quality of the product so that people will buy. To ensure that, probably we need some process. Good. Yeah. What else? Good.
To speed up the process.
To speed up the process, yes. That means to be more efficient, right? That means like you need to utilize the resources in a good way, and you can be just really productive. For that, probably you need a process. Good. Great. Thanks a lot for your answers, and I really appreciate that. That's really good. And I'll start things off with a quote by Mr. Bill Gates. I hope everybody knows who Bill Gates is. Again, this is not my words. This is Bill Gates' words. And what he said was, to be a good professional engineer, always start to study late for exams, because it teaches you how to manage time and tackling. So Professor Vasanthappan or Professor or the other lecturers, I mean, if you want to get people hold of this comment, you need to get hold of Bill Gates, not me, because if you really want the students to start studying at the beginning, this is a kind of opposing statement that Bill Gates has made, and it kinds of starts us wondering, why does he make a statement like that? So again, going back to the statement, the whole purpose is actually, I mean, it has a meaning. It makes sense to some extent, because if you, I mean, let's say if you are in a situation where you are really limited with the resources that you have, like it can be knowledge, it can be time, it can be your skills, it can be information, everything. So if you are in a really limited resource situation, you really need to think about smart ways of overcoming your goal, right? So you really need to look at smart ways of overcoming your goals. And for you to do that, you really need to have some kind of a smart process, or some kind of I could say a way of working. In software engineering, it can be waterfall, it can be prototyping, it can be agile, it can be extreme programming, it can be Kanban, it can be lean, whatever. But still, there has to be a really good way of working that suits your goal, and that helps you to achieve your goals quickly and with high quality. So that's the whole purpose of having a process. And if you look at the software engineering context, if you look at the software development context in organizations, that is exactly the same. Now, let's say if you work in a company, when you get into a company and when you start developing software to sell, what you really need to keep in mind would be like, you will face limited resource situations always, all the time. You will be limited with the number of people that you have to do the development. You will be limited with the knowledge that you have on different technologies. You will be limited with the time, because you probably will have very less time to provide the entire solution to your customers. The customers will be just coming after you to get the answers. And another really important thing that you have to keep in your mind is actually, now, I mean, if you go to the industry, you really need to develop solutions that suits the customer's needs. How many of you have done mini projects during your undergraduate studies right now? Students who are in third year, fourth year, maybe you can answer, like, have you all done mini projects like as modules or as part of your subjects so far? Or you haven't done a single project so far in your university life?
We did.
You did. Good. Okay. We'll start with a little bit of a background, and when it comes to agile, what it really means, and now how agile came into the picture to the world. This came early 2000s, and what happened was, like, during that time, there were so many different software development processes in the industry. Like, there were processes like rational unified process, extreme programming, unified modeling language. There were so many different software development processes defined by different people, different authors who were more like missionaries of the industry. And what they did was, like, since there were lots of different software development processes by that time, all those authors, all those people, they kind of got together in one place, and they had 3 full days of brainstorming session to see whether there are any common grounds, whether there are any common patterns on those different software development processes, so that maybe they can come up with some kind of a common process. And the outcome of that particular brainstorming session was something called the Agile Manifesto. If you have never heard about this, you can just Google and you can just get yourself informed about the Agile Manifesto. You can get lots of details, information about Agile Manifesto. So what Agile Manifesto contains is actually just simply 2 things. It has something called 4 core values. I don't intend to just explain all the values, but like just core 4 values, and then it has 12 different principles. Again, I don't expect you to go through this, but you can always just Google and find this information from the internet, and I will share the slides anyway with you as well. And if you look at the Agile Manifesto, again, as I said, it contains 4 core values and 12 principles. And what they said was, whatever the software development process which contains these core values and which contains these 12 principles can be labeled as an agile software development process. So that's all what they did after 3 full days of conversation. So they just came up with this manifesto saying that we have come to a conclusion about having 4 core values and 12 principles, and whatever the software development process that has those values and the principles can be labeled as an agile software development process. So that was way back in early 2000s, and since then I think agile has evolved a lot. Like we're talking about a time span of a little bit over 20 years now. And during this past 20 years, agile has evolved a lot, and there has been lots of discovery around this, and there has been lots of changes around this as well. And if I just explain a little bit about some of the statistics, if you want to look at how agile has served the software development software engineering industry, there's this independent group called Standish Group, where they perform yearly agile surveys, and I have just shared the link for their website as well. And I think they have published the 13th report as well recently. So what they do is actually they just look at the industry, they just take random samples from the different sectors of the industry, and they look at the different software development processes that the companies are doing, and they do lots of statistical analysis, and they just publish this report every year. And this was published, I think, 1 or 2 years back. And this is the kind of overall high-level summary of the report. And if you look at the summary, what they have found out was actually, if you look at that state, these were the main reasons for organizations to adopt agile, because lots of organizations have adopted agile over traditional software development methods, and of course they have seen lots of benefits by doing that. And these are some of the benefits that they have seen. And if you look at the samples, you can see either almost 50% or more than 50% have accepted the fact that agile has proved really well. It does not mean that every agile project will be successful or is going to be successful, but I mean, in general, if you look at the overall statistics, agile processes or agile way of development, agile way of software development has proven that it's far better than the traditional software development methods. And there are so many different reasons for that, and there are so many things. Okay, then the question is like, we talked a little bit about the importance of being agile. And again, a question to you. What do you mean by agile?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can hear you well, yes.
So it's a software development methodology, sir.
Okay, it's a software development methodology. Thanks, Tintu. Yeah, great. And anyone else who can add a little bit more color to that, or anyone else who can add a little bit more information on that? Or if you have a different thought, that's fine. So,
It's a method for increase productivity.
It's a method to increase productivity. Good. Ashen, right?
Yes.
Thanks, Ashen. Yeah, good. Good. Any more answers?
So it is a type of project management process.
It's a type of a process, a project management process. Okay. Okay. Just to go back to some of the answers that you gave, and just to maybe highlight the fact, like if I just go back maybe 2-3 slides again, I will not go into those slides, but now there's something called Agile Manifesto, which talks a lot about a set of values and a set of principles. And if you look at Agile, there are really good answers about, like, it's a kind of a way where we can improve the productivity. It's a kind of way where it's a software development process. So there were so many different answers. What I would say is, like, if you take Agile itself is actually not a software development process. It's not a software development process. Agile is more like a mindset. It's more like a thought process. It's more like a thinking. And there are so many different software development processes that are Agile. For example, Scrum. Scrum is a software development process, which is Agile. If you take extreme programming, XP is a software development process, which is Agile. But if you take Agile as a whole, Agile itself is more like a mindset rather than a set of rules or a set of guidelines. I mean, if I just connect that to the Agile Manifesto also, what it says is, like, it talks about values, it talks about principles. So values and principles will drive some behaviors rather than people trying to follow a set of rules. So if you look at Agile, I think that's how we see about Agile. And I will explain this a little bit more, and I'll try to explain why we say it's a kind of a mindset as well. And to explain that, I'll take, like, 2 different anomalies here. One is called complex systems, and then there's another aspect called social brain. So I'll try to explain these 2 separately, and we'll see how it goes. And again, just shout out if things are not clear to you. If you have different thoughts, if you have different opinions, just please shout out. That's perfectly fine. I'll start with something called the social brain. And the social brain is actually something which is really, really relevant to us as humans. And I mean, humans are considered to be like social animals. And I'll explain what social means. Now, if you look at us, again, try to relate the things that I'm saying to your personal life. Just try to relate it to yourself and see whether what I'm saying makes sense or whether it does not make sense. Now, if you look at we as humans, what we are used to is actually, it's called, like, humans are social animals. That means, like, we are kind of dependent on the surroundings that we have. We are kind of dependent on the tribe that we belong into, or we are kind of dependent on the people that that are around us. And normally humans do not like to just work or stay alone. Humans are a set of animals who try to work in groups and work together as a kind of a tribe or a herd. So that's the kind of behavior of humans, and that is exactly one of the reasons why humans have evolved a lot, because they have learned from each other, and also they help each other, even though they fight each other as well. So that is one of the reasons why they have evolved, and also that is one of the reasons why they have survived so far, because people are helping each other out, and people are dependent on each other. So that's why people have been surviving, if you take humans, for example. And there has been different experiments done on this social aspect of people, and there have been experiments done to identify what this really means. And I mean, you can just Google about this topic and you can find lots of information, research papers, videos, and so many different things. So if you're interested, just search and you can find lots of information. I'll try to explain some. Like, for example, now let's say as humans, like, if we get physically threatened, like, let's say if someone is hitting us, or if someone is trying to stab us with a knife, what's going to happen is, like, as humans, we naturally tend to respond to that, right? What's going to happen is, like, there are different responses that we will take for that. Like, probably we'll fight back, or whether we will run, or if we will shout. So there will be certain things that will happen even without our intention. And there are certain kind of enzymes that are created in our brain to make us do those things, right? So I mean, when we do this, when we have this physical threat, people get those enzymes created in their brains so that they will respond in a different way. And what they have found out, the scientists, it's a kind of very interesting fact. Like, even though people does not get any kind of physical threat, if they feel like they are socially threatened by the community that they are in, I mean, again, no physical context, but if they feel like they are socially threatened, those humans will still get the same enzymes created in their brains, which means, like, if the conclusion of that is actually, if a particular individual feels like they are socially threatened, they will really behave in a really negative way on the environment. So that's how we humans behave. And there are so many models to represent, what social brain means. And, one important, one, fairly popular model is, defined by a guy called David Rock. What he says is, like, there are 5 different factors that comes together to define what social threaten means. And these are status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. So I will not go into details about this, but I just try to explain this a little bit on a very, very high level. Now, let's say if you are in a group, if you are in a in a place where you have some people around you, and if you feel like the other people who are around you does not treat you the same way the others are being treated, you tend to behave negatively. You tend to behave like you tend to move away from that environment, right? Because you don't feel like you are kind of accepted on that environment. It's not about your status, so it's not about exactly what your position is, but it's more about whether you are accepted on that tribe or not. And if you look at, like, any business, if you look at any company, when you have employees working, if a particular employee feels like that he or she is not accepted in his or her team, even though that person is really, really skilled, the way they behave would be really negative, and that will have a really negative impact on that individual as well as the organization as well. And there are things like that kinds of relates to the social aspect of people. And, like, things like autonomy means, it's more like, let's say, if you are being told what to do, and if you're being told what not to do all the time, always, people tend to behave in a different way. Like, if you feel like you have a freedom to make your own decisions with the responsibility of the consequences, people will be more creative. People will start thinking outside the box, and people will start making new innovations. But let's say, if you are in a situation where everything is being told to you, the creativity is kind of killed. So people will just do if someone asks you to do. If not, they will not do anything. So that's a kind of a negative behavior on people on the creativity aspect. So there are different things that kinds of relates to this social aspect of people, and I will not go into details. But if you are interested, you can just Google and find lots of information. And if you have questions, just shout out. Then probably I can answer those questions as well. And now I can see a question that was typed in. Is this agile word come from agility? Not exactly, but it's the other way around. The word agility comes from agile, so it's the other way around. But probably I'll touch on that a little bit, when I talk a little bit about business agility when time permits, if time permits. And then there's another aspect called complex systems. And I think some of you gave an answer of what a system is. I mean, it can be a software engineer, software system. It can be anything. If you take any system in the world, any system can be defined into like this is called Kinevin framework. It's a kind of Welsh word, and this is a kind of framework that defines the different types of systems. So what they say is, like, if you take any system can be divided into one of these 4 categories. It's called complex, complicated, chaotic, and simple system. So if you take any system, any system will be part of one of these 4 categories. And I'll explain some. Like, let's say, for example, if there is a system where you just start manufacturing, let's say, t-shirts or socks, you need thread for that. You know that you need some, processes for that. So then you do the same thing over and over again to get the same expected outcome. So those kind of systems are called simple systems, because you know the process, you know what are the materials that are needed, and then you know how to do it, and then you can measure the outcomes. So it's a very simple system. And then there are, I mean, the other extreme end, those are called chaotic systems, where you have disorder everywhere. The way you do, what you're going to do, when you're going to deliver, what is the need of your stakeholders or the customers, everything is unclear. So then those systems are called chaotic, which is on the other extreme end, where you don't know what to do, you don't know whether you can get a profit or not, whether you don't know whether you will get something valuable or not, you don't know what to do. So that's the other extreme end. Then we have two other different types of systems which lies in between simple and chaotic, and those are called complex and complicated systems. And I'll start with the complicated systems. And if you're familiar with playing chess, for example, playing chess is kind of considered to be a complicated system, because there are so many different combinations, there are so many different roles for different pieces, and you need to adhere to those roles, and there is a goal, a clear goal, but still there are so many different ways to achieve the goal. It's not just a single way that is there to achieve the goal, but it's very, very complicated because there are so many different combinations. And but one important fact in a complicated system is, no matter how complicated those systems are predictable, because you know the rules, you know the possible options, or you know the possible paths that you can take. So those systems can be considered as predictable systems, even though how complicated they are. And then there is this third type, which is called complex systems. And if you take complex systems, it's more like if you're familiar with playing cards, for example, if you're familiar with playing a game like 304, what's going to happen is if you play a game like 304, there is an element of thinking that is important there. You need to rationally think, you need to rationalize the combinations, and you need to play smart. That's one thing. But even though how smart you are, depending on the cards that you get, it will have an impact. And you don't know what are the cards that you're going to get, right, unless you cheat, isn't it? So then if you take a complex system, the difference between a complex system and a complicated system is there is an element of uncertainty in a complex system all the time. So even though you are really good at analytical thinking, even though you are really good at the skills that you have, but still there is an element of uncertainty that plays there. So because of that, it's very difficult to define all the different paths, because the paths are going to change all the time. And if you consider path X as a good path in this particular game, when you move into the next game, the same path would be a really bad path as well. So because of that, it's very difficult to define a single path which we can say this is a really good path. It's not. And if you look at the practices also in systems, it's exactly the same. So if I just go back to a simple system, like making a software, a simple straightforward system. In a simple system, there will always be a best practice. Like, this is the best way where you can get the best outcome. So that will always be there. So just one single best practice to get the work done in a simple system. But if you take a complicated system, since the system itself is really complicated and there are so many different paths, there isn't a single path which can be considered as a best practice, but there are so many different paths that can be considered as best practices. So then, because of that, normally we use the term called good practices or best practices. So there are so many different paths which are equally good. So that is a fact in a complicated system. But then if you take a complex system, the difference is actually, in a complex system, there is nothing called best practice, or there's nothing called best practices, because, the best practice that we had today might be a worst practice for tomorrow. So because of that, in a complex system, there's no such thing called a best practice or best practices. What it has is something called emergent practices, something called, evolving practices. So you need to keep evolving your practices to make it optimize in the context that you are in. Because again, because the reason for that is actually there is an element of uncertainty there. And if we just try to, okay, before moving to that, now, if you take software development context, where do you think that software development fits in this, quadrant? Can someone tell me? I guess, or maybe your thought.
Complex.
Complex. Okay. Why do you say it's complex? Someone else can answer.
How much involved in the process of producing, and so many tools they are used.
Exactly. There are so many tools. Yeah, what else? Good. Good. Thanks for the answer, Dibuso. I mean, if you take software development context, now normally we never develop something already been developed, right? Because then if there is already a product, then probably we can make use of it. So when we do software development, in 95% of the time, what we do is we develop something new. We develop something new to solve a problem of our customer or a stakeholder, right? And then when we try to solve that, there are so many different unknown elements that comes into play. It can be technology that we are going to use because the technology keeps on evolving all the time. And it can be the people who are going to do the development because people will change. People will just join in companies. People will resign from the companies. People will just move out. And people will have different set of skills. And if you look at the requirements of the customer, if you look at the requirements of your stakeholders, that's not static. That's going to change all the time. Like, let's say if you get a customer coming into, if you're a software vendor and asking a set of requirements today, and he or she might come back to you in 6 months' time and give you totally a different set of requirements because his business has changed. His business landscape has changed. Because of that, his requirements has also changed. So because of that, in software development context, there is always an element of uncertainty that plays here. And because of that, yes, normally in most of the cases, the software development context falls into the complex category here, not the complicated, but the complex category, because it needs an element of analytical thinking. Yes, that's true, but it still has some element of uncertainty as well. And then, if we all believe that the software development context is complex and it has some element of uncertainty, then we define set of software development processes to eliminate that, right? That's the whole purpose. And if you look at the different types of software development processes, or if you look at the different types of processes, processes will have two different categories, main categories. Some of the processes falls into a category called defined processes. And then there are some set of processes which are called adaptive processes. The difference between a defined process and an adaptive process is, in a defined process, you define all the steps that you need to do or that you need to follow to get something done. So you define all the different processes or the steps upfront, so that the people who get involved on the development, they can just follow those steps and reach the goal. Those are called defined processes. And then there are another set of processes which are called adaptive processes, where they do not define each and every step. Rather, what they do is they define a goal. They define a goal, they define an expectation, and then they let the people who does the work find their own ways to achieve the goal. And sometimes they will be successful, sometimes they will fail, but still what they're trying to do is they're trying to evolve what they're doing to achieve the goal. So those kind of processes are called adaptive process, or those are called, another word is called empirical process control mechanisms. And if you look at software development processes, if you look at different types of software development processes, things like waterfall methodology, things like spiral methodology, those kind of things falls into defined processes, because in waterfall, what it says is like it defines the steps. You need to get together the requirements, you need to do the analysis, you need to do the design, you need to do the implementation and testing and deployment, whatever. So you define all the steps, and then people need to follow those steps. And if you take agile processes, like Scrum, Kanban, Lean, XP, those falls into adaptive processes. I mean, in agile processes like Scrum, Kanban, Lean, there are no really hard and fast guidelines. Rather, they have more frameworks, and rather they have some expectations and goals. And people are supposed to experiment. People are supposed to try to improve all the time, while trying to reach the goal. So that is the whole difference between the defined process and the adaptive process. And if I relate this to the systems theory that I was talking before, now we all know that software development context is complex, which means like there is some element of unpredictability. And if we have an element of unpredictability, what's going to happen is like if you try to define all the processes that we need to do upfront, it's not compatible, right? Because there are so many different paths and things going to change all the time. But rather, if we can have an adaptive process where we set the goal and let people figure out how they're going to do it along the way, that suits better. I'm not saying that is the best solution, but that suits better compared to the previous one. And that is exactly why in software development context, agile processes have proven that they have served better in organizations rather than the traditional methods like waterfall and different things. Again, I'm not saying waterfall is bad. It was good. Like if you look at maybe 10 20 years back, things were not that complex. There weren't many technologies. So then maybe we were able to define things. But now what has happened is like the technology is changing really fast, people's expectations change really fast, and the business domains change really fast, and there are so many unexpected things that comes out of the blue. For example, COVID. I mean, none of us thought about this maybe 2 years back, right? 2 years before, but it came in, right? Because of that, there are so many things that are changing all the time, and things are really, really complex. And if you really want to develop solutions that suits that kind of business, and if you try to take a traditional approach, things would be pretty difficult. That's exactly why again, agile processes like Scrum, Kanban has proved that they have been successful in the companies in practice. And again, if you put the complex systems and the social aspect of people, because we are people, and people, and we are dealing with people, and people who develop software are people who use software are also people. So because of that, people has some element of social aspect that comes in, which with lots of complexity, and then we have systems which are complex. So if you put those two together, then we really have a really, really complex system altogether. And because of that, sometimes evolving process serves better. Any questions from anyone, or any comments, any thoughts from?
So is this agile method suitable for every kind of projects, like data science project or something, aerospace projects or engineering process?
Okay, good question. Well, I mean, again, if you look at agile mindset, if you look at agile thinking, yes, agile thinking can be applied to any context, even washing a car, even painting your room, it can be applied. But the question is like, even if it can be applied, whether it would be the best process, or whether it would be the best approach for that, then the answer would be like, that's the same for the example that you gave us, like for example, if it's a data science project, or whatever the project that you work in, the same mindset can be applied. The question is whether it's suitable for that particular context or not. So what I can share there, what I can say there is actually, now, whatever the thing that you do, if you are limited with resources, if you're limited with knowledge, if you're limited with people, if you're limited with time, and if you really want to get a really good job done there, then agile approach suits better. If you have unlimited resources, if you have unlimited knowledge, then maybe taking a traditional approach and trying to define everything and get it done would suits better. But if you live in a situation where things are uncertain, things are not clear, then agile approach suits best for you. I can maybe share some examples, like just for you to get some idea. Okay, just trying to take now. Let's say I mean, all of you are kind of familiar with you have semesters. Am I correct? In the university.
Yes, sir.
How long is the semester? Is it 15 weeks?
Yes, sir. Around
okay,
15 weeks.
Around 15 weeks. Now, just take a situation. Now, let's say you are at the beginning of your semester, and you know that you need to study, for example, let's say 4 subjects, and you know who are the lecturers who are teaching those subjects, and you know that you have 15 weeks of time to learn and study and get prepared for the exam, and then you start working. And let's say you are a really, really good student and you are really into studies only. And what you do is like, from the day one, you plan everything. Okay, first week, I'm going to go for all the lectures and I'm going to take the notes. I'll start studying, I'll start referring books, and you make a plan from day one for all, the entire 15 weeks, and then you stick with the plan. And assume that, you are in a really good situation where you were able to execute the plan because you did not come across any hiccups, and then it's fine, right? Then, defining everything upfront will serve you better, because then you can get the best outcome there as well. But let's say you are in a situation where, even though you start the semester today, looking at 15 weeks ahead, along the way, there are so many things that comes that you need to face, like, things that you do not expect. Like, say, for example, you are a fan of, watching cricket, and you spend like, 2 weekends watching cricket matches, going there and watching, and you miss some lectures. And then probably, your parents get sick and you had to go and treat them and maybe, help them out. So you miss some lectures. And then when you come back, sometimes, the subjects are not familiar to you, and, you can't find the book, so you don't have the notes. So if you come with a situation like that, then what's going to happen now? Then probably now, let's say if you face those kind of different things along the way, and now you are in a situation where, you are just like, just 2 weeks before the exam, and the state that you are in would be like, you don't have all the notes right now with you, and you don't know some of the subjects, you don't understand some of the subjects, but still you only have 2 weeks in advance, and you need to study and make sure that, you get good results. Then how can you define everything? It's very difficult, right? But if you take an agile approach, probably in a situation where you are limited with resources, the time, skills, notes, whatever, probably, rather than having a defined upfront approach, maybe an agile approach would suit. So just to answer your question again, if your data science project is in a context where you can predict everything, you can plan everything, then agile is not the best approach. But let's say if your project is really uncertain, if you don't know what to do, what not to do, and you don't have the skills, you don't have the resources, then an agile approach will suit you better. Okay, then just coming back here, coming to the same topic now, I was talking about the social aspect of people, then I was talking about the complex system. And if you put these two together, we really have a complex system. And if you really have a complex system, and in a company, if you try to supervise people, if you try to do resource allocations, like, this particular individual needs to work on this particular software or whatever, and then if you try to detail plan and try to take a command and control approach in a complex scenario, in a complex system, do you think that's going to work? What we're trying to do is like, you have an environment where you do software development, and what you're trying to do is like, you supervise all the engineers, you try to do resource allocations, you try to give individual assignments for people, and then you detail upfront planning to get the software delivered. Do you think in software development context, do you think it will work?
No, sir.
It might not work, right? Yeah, true. So rather, if you take an agile approach, if you take an agile community, what they say is like, you start with a purpose. I mean, okay, you tell people, okay, this is what we are going to do, and this is why we need to do it. So you start with the what and the why. You start with the purpose, and what you do is along the way you do continuous planning. So it doesn't mean that you start without having any kind of plan. You start with a very high level small plan, and then what you do is when you start progressing in your project, you continuously plan, and that is called pragmatic plan. So it's continuous planning, and the entire system is mainly based on trust. People need to make sure that I mean, there are some assumptions saying that people need to do their best, and they really need to have the common goal of achieving the purpose. People should not have their own private goals. Rather, everybody is trying to pull together to achieve the purpose. So if you create an environment where you have a purpose and you continuously plan, and you build an environment where you have the trust, then people will engage, people will energize, and people will give their best. And that gives a really good result at the end. So if you look at agile concept, the whole idea, the whole purpose of having agile context is to give people the purpose and let people define their own ways along the way, and create an environment where we can trust each other out. So that's the whole purpose of agile thinking. And just go back and when you're done with this session, just try to Google for Agile Manifesto, read the core values, read the principles, and probably you might be able to relate those principles and core values into some of the things that I've shared today as well, the concept, the kind of thinking behind all those things. And just to give you a kind of an anomaly for that also, like, I mean, maybe this might not be the best, but maybe I can, instead of taking this example, I can take maybe a slightly different example. Okay, again, since some of you haven't get into the university physically and started studying, maybe then probably you might need to relate this to maybe your school context or whatever. I mean, let's say I mean, how many of you have, okay, I had to take a generic example, right? I mean, how many of you have involved in team sports during your school career or university days? If you have been to university, how many of you have involved in sports, some kind of a team sport, like playing netball, football, basketball, playing cricket, whatever? I mean, any team sport? Is there anyone who has involved in team sports?
Cricket and volleyball.
Okay, now I assume that probably you would have at least seen people playing something like football, right? Now, let's say if you take football as a game and you have 11 players in the team, and people get together and they work out as a team and they play as a team, isn't it? And let's say if you have a coach who's sitting outside the ground and telling people how to move, what not to move all the time when the ball is on play, do you think that's going to work? Then all the players will always look out for the coach all the time rather than focusing on the ball and trying to play together, right? Because they are dependent on the coach all the time. But coach will be there to guide them, to help them out, to train them. But when they start playing a match, they really need to work together, and everybody should need to have a common purpose of maybe achieving a goal. So if they achieve the goal, they win. So what happens is, like, people work together, and sometimes even if you are not the person who's going to score the goal, you should have the mindset of passing the ball to a friend in your team who can make the goal, right? So if you have that mindset, what's going to happen is that as a team, they're going to win, because they are helping each other out. But let's say, for example, if you have a personal goal saying that, okay, I don't really care whether my team wins or not, but I really want to score a goal myself. So if you have a personal goal like that, what's going to happen would be that will have a big impact on the entire team. Even though you score a goal, still you might lose, your team might lose, because you had your own personal goal. So if you look at a complex system also, it's the same thing. Now, let's say if you have people who have their personal goals, that's not going to work. You really need to have a group of people working together with a common purpose and a common goal. And if you have an environment where people trust each other out, things are going to get really good. And that is the whole essence of being agile. That is the whole essence of making sure that we create environments in businesses where people can work in teams, and people can work in teams and work together to achieve the goal. Because if you take software development context, one really important thing that all of you need to remember would be, like, all the technologies are going to change, the requirements are going to change, the requirements would be really, really complex. So if we live in a context like that, we can't find a single person who knows everything. If you look at the knowledge would be scattered. That is why software engineering industry is called the knowledge industry. The knowledge is scattered, and you need to get the people who have the knowledge together to get the real pitch out. That means, like, collaboration, willing to share their knowledge with each other, trying to understand from someone else is really the key. It's really important. So if you look at the industry, it's really important that people work as a team. We work together to get the complex problem solved, because we are not talking about solving a simple single problem. We're talking about multiple large businesses with complex problems, and we are trying to solve them together. So a single individual, him or herself, might not be able to solve those kind of things. So because of that, it's really important that we get the people engaged to solve those things. So if you look at agile processes, if you look at agile thinking is all around that thinking. So agile thinking promotes people to work together. Agile thinking promotes people to share the knowledge. And agile thinking promotes people to experiment and even to fail, so that they know that this particular path is not going to be successful. That's the whole idea there. And if you look at a kind of a holistic mindset, like if you look at the different systems, you can have processes and tools, you can have practices, the principles and the values and the mindset. So if you look at the tangible things, when you have more clearly defined processes, those are really tangible. You can follow up, you can measure them. But if you look at the real power of those things, people can always find loopholes on those things, and then things are not going to be successful. But rather than that, if people have the right mindset, the right level, those are really, really important, and it has a really good value as outcome. I mean, I can just take a few examples for this as well. Now, just take the current context. Now we are in a situation where technically we are under lockdown. There are some set of rules, right? Now you are technically locked down, which means like you are not allowed to go out, and if you want to buy some food or whatever, you can just walk from your house to the nearest shop which is open, and then you can get those things. And then if you really want to go far ahead, then you need to have either a kind of a letter, or there are certain rules. So what happens is, like, if people just look at that context as just a set of rules, just a set of processes, what's going to happen is people will always find loopholes on those things. I mean, that is exactly what is happening in our country in most of the cases, right? Because even though technically we are under lockdown, if you look at the roads, if you are living by a road, you could see lots of people going, and there are lots of vehicles going as well. And there can be a reason for that. There might not be a reason for that as well. And the repercussion is actually we still get higher counts, we still get higher death rates in the country. But let's say if people start thinking about the purpose, thinking about the mindset, okay, now we are under lockdown because we really need to be careful. We are under lockdown because everyone in the country, every single person in the country should avoid getting contracted with the virus. So if people think about that as a purpose, people will always find reasons not to go out from their country, but from their houses. But if there are situations where they really want to go out, they will go out. But still, if not, they will find reasons not to go out. But if you just omit the purpose, and if you just look at the process and tools, people will always find loopholes. People will always find places where you can you can just sneak through the rules and then get out. But that's not how it should be. I mean, that is exactly why having the right mindset really serves the purpose. And again, in software development, in complex systems, in any business, it's the same. If you have the right mindset, it's really, really powerful. But if you don't have the right mindset, things are going to be really, really ugly. That's the reality. So again, going back to Agile concept, going back to Agile mindset, that is exactly why Agile talks a lot about the mindset. Agile talks a lot about the values and the principles. So when you have a certain set of good values and a certain set of good principles, that will drive some behaviors on the people. If the behaviors are right, the outcome is really good, really powerful. But if the behaviors are wrong, outcome is bad. So that is exactly what is the kind of the essence of the concept of Agile. And if you look at the bottom layer, if you look at the processes and tools, processes and tools can be adapted in a command and control way, where you can just set the rules, you can just put some police and make sure that those rules are adhered to or not. But if you really want to get the real essence out of it, then we need to go beyond processes, we need to go beyond practices, we need to culture, we need to have the right mindset so that we'll drive the right behaviors. That is what Agile is all about. That is exactly why at the beginning I spoke a lot about Agile and its mindset. Any comments or any questions from anyone?
So we know people are always different. Actually, their mindsets also different. Actually, when we start the project, how we choose the team using this Agile, because they are different. We don't know what kind of mind set they have.
Right. Okay. Right. So if I just revert to a kind of a practical context in a practical project, one thing is like, let's say if the requirements are not super clear, if you don't know how to solve the customer's problem in a better way, if you don't know what are the technologies that you're going to do, one thing that the team needs to have in common would be the true intention of achieving the goal of the project, the true intention of solving the problem. So if they don't have that true intention, project is not going to be successful at all anyway. So that's rule number one. I mean, people can have different thoughts, people can have their own values, people can have their own goals. That's fine. But if you get into a team, if you need to work as a team to get some project done, the bottom line would be like, you need to have the intention, the genuine intention of solving the problem. If not, it's not going to work. And I can relate to that also with the, for example, the interviews that we conduct as well. Now, probably you might wonder, like, if you have a really good GPA and if you get a first class, why can't I be just recruited to a company? Because I do have first class and, I have proven that I have the knowledge. Why can't I join a company? And even if you go for an interview, there will be lots of technical questions, there will be lots of questions, and probably you will not have just one single interview. You will have a series of interviews. Maybe if you get through the first interview, you will need to face for another interview and maybe another one. So there are different levels. And why do we really need to have different levels? One reason is this, like, I mean, if you are really, if you're really a skilled person, but if you do not have the right mindset that suits the organization, organizations will never recruit you. Even though you have first class, people will not recruit you. Even if you're recruited, later on, you will be asked to leave the company because you don't have the right mindset. So it's really important that we have the right people with the right mindset first. And I mean, people can always be trained for skills. Now, again, when I started today's presentation, I talk a little bit about humans. I mean, one key element of humans is the ability to observe and ability to adjust and ability to learn. So that is a key, feature of every human being. If you are a human being without any kind of disabilities, then you should be able to look at and able to learn. So again, going into the same context, if you don't have a set of people with the right mindset, even though they have the skills, things going to be worse. But if you have a set of people who have the right mindset, a genuine expectations or a genuine goals, they can always be trained for skills. So going back to your question also, like, if you have a team working in a project, the basic essence, the basic starting point would be everybody needs to get together and agree, okay, this is what we are going to achieve, and we really, really need to achieve this. So if that intention is there in every single team member, it will be a successful project, no matter how difficult it is. But even if it's a straightforward, simple project, but if the team members are on different levels, if team members' mindsets are different, things will be worse, things will be bad. That's the reality. So again, going back to your question, when you start a project, it's really important that everybody has the genuine intention of solving a problem. And then there are so many different tools and techniques that can be used to decide how you're going to work. Like, for example, if you take a framework like Scrum, there are concepts like planning meetings, daily stand-up meetings, sprint reviews or sprint demos, and you have something called backlog grooming meetings, prioritization meetings. There are so many different meetings. There are different techniques that you can use. You can use those things to get the work done. But that's not what matters. What matters is the mindset and the genuine intention of solving the problem. Does that answers your question? I know it's a little bit of a lengthy question, but I just wanted to cover the context as well.
Yes, it's clear. Thank you, sir.
So can you share some tips about how we can manage people inside the project time? I mean, how to concentrate their work for project. Right.
One thing would be like, again, if I just go back to, if you can just recall the explanation that I gave on the social aspect of people, the social brain or the social aspect of people, if you try to manage people all the time, there are two different words called managing and leading. It's totally two different words. Managing is one thing, leading is one thing. I mean, it does not overlaps. Right? Now, if you try to manage people, if you try to tell them what to do, what not to do all the time, what's going to happen would be like, the moment that you stop telling them to do something, they will stop doing it because they know that, they were not told to do it. And they will always come back and come back with excuses saying that, you did not ask me to do this, you did not tell me to do this, because of that, I did not do it. So they will always find reasons not to do things. But if you try to lead people, that's totally a different thing. And leadership is altogether a kind of a topic that probably we can take on a different note, like how we can do it. And there are so many techniques, there are so many different researches that have been done. But leading is actually you are setting some, I mean, on a very high level, you are trying to set some examples by yourself, and you try to, and people will look at those people, and then people will start following those people, even though they are not telling you to do something. It's because people perceive that the leaders are really, I mean, they are really good, and they are doing something good for the community, they are doing something good for you and for your tribe or for your team. So people start contributing the way they can to get those things. So if you are in a team, I would say, rather than managing the people, I think the best way would be to make sure that you lead them and you set yourself as an example. So if that happens, people will naturally follow, because again, that goes back to the normal human behavior where, if people start seeing something good, people will follow. I can just give you some examples now. How many of you are using Google Earth?
Yes, sir.
You're using. Do you rely on Google Earth data?
Not in every moment, sometimes.
Okay, but major, like, let's say if you take a guess, like what is the percentage that you rely on Google data information?
60%.
60%. Okay, what about the others?
70.
70. Okay, just
80.
try to 80. Is it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, just I mean, just try to recall a situation where you have you wanted to go to a place where, I know it's been some time since you started traveling, but just recall a time where you wanted to go somewhere and you relied on Google Earth or Google Maps, and then it did not serve the purpose. Do you have so many occurrences like that, or has it served the purpose most of the time?
It done that.
It does, right? And do you know that anybody can, I mean, if you're a committer, you can always do changes, right? You can just add stuff, you can add addresses, you can do changes, right? It's the community who maintains the data, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So then, I mean, people can always do bad things. People can always feed it with misinformation. But what has happened is, like, the moment that someone has seen there is a misinformation, people tend to correct it. So because of that, what has happened was, like, people, I mean, again, the intention of people is to make sure that, we do have a really good platform to navigate when we don't know the path. So because of that, if everybody has that intention, what has happened is, like, it has evolved a lot. And now we have a really good platform where we can rely, in most of the cases, we can rely on that, isn't it? So that's a kind of example where, everybody has a purpose. I mean, there can be situations where there can be exceptions where we can have, few people who have a different purpose. But still, if you have the majority with the right purpose, what's going to happen is, like, if I just revert back to the people, like, if you really want to survive in a tribe, you simply can't survive in a team if you have a totally different purpose than the majority of them. Either you need to change the purpose of the others, or you need to change the purpose of yourself, or you need to move away from it. You will only get stuck with the team if you have the same purpose as well. So because of that, if you can create an environment in a team where most of the people have the common purpose, and if the people are genuinely trying to get something done, the others will follow. I can share that from my experience as well. Rather than just asking people to do certain things, you can do it yourself and show it to the others how it's been done, and people will start following if it's the right thing to do. Okay, as I said, like, again, Agile itself is more like a mindset, and there are so many different software development processes that falls under Agile umbrella. And I have listed few, like Scrum, XP, Lean, Kanban, FTD, SDM. There are so many different frameworks that falls under Agile umbrella. And if you try to sum everything together, what Agile is all about is letting people experiment. And even if you fail, it's fine. But you really need to fail fast so that you have more time to adjust and be successful. That's the whole idea of being agile. This kind of gives you a kind of high level holistic idea about the different artifacts, the different terms, the different key terms that is kind of relevant to the agile landscape. And this creation is not one of my creations. This is done by a person called Lean Crazy. She's a really good person, and a really good person with having visual effects. I have met that person. I have been sitting with that person for some time as well. So she has done really good work on visualizing stuff, and this is one of the diagrams that she has created. I mean, in this has different, this contains all the different key elements that that goes around agile things like self-organizing teams, business people and developers working together, change requirements, shorter time to market, frequent deliveries. Frequent deliveries, relates to things like CI/CD. If you have heard about those things, like creating pipelines, build pipelines, build deployment pipelines, deployment automation, and it moves into the direction of DevOps, for example. And then continuous attention, satisfying the customer, technical excellence, like automation, test automation, things like that. And building projects around motivated individuals rather than just the project. So, and then having collaboration, face-to-face communication, working together. I mean, everything that relates to agile landscape, all the different key terms are mentioned here. And if you want to start from somewhere, I think this would be a really good place. You can just look at this image, and if you know what these terms means, then it's good. If you do not know what these terms means, you can always Google and find articles, presentations on the different terms. And if you put everything together, you get the Agile Manifesto. If you put everything together, you get the Agile thinking. So I think this would be really useful for you. And this is a kind of a diagram that was created by one of my colleagues who used to work with me at my company some time ago, a colleague from Sweden. And this also gives a really good overview of what Agile mindscape is. This was kind of developed maybe 4 or 5 years ago, which has a really good vision, and things like DevOps, continuous delivery, everything is kind of here. And I will not explain each and everything here, but this gives a kind of very high level holistic overview of how things fit together on a large business domain. How we can do things in a really good way, and how can we continuously improve in a complex system with knowledge workers, dealing with the information systems. So this is a really good overall picture here as well. And okay, I'll just move on then. If you look at Scrum, again, I will not go into fine details of Scrum, but I'll rather give you a kind of a high level overview of what Scrum means. And again, you can always find information, and just feel free to contact me or ask questions at any given time. That's perfectly fine. And if you look at Scrum framework, what it does is actually, Scrum is not an acronym. It's just it's derived from the word scrum in rugby. If you're familiar with rugby football, it's the same thing. I mean, Scrum is again totally based on the concept that people need to work together to achieve something out as a team. So that's the whole essence of Scrum. And if you take Scrum, if you put everything together and try to explain what Scrum means, I would say it's an agile framework that allows everyone to focus on delivering the highest business value as quickly as possible. And if you look at Scrum framework, it does not mean that it tries to deliver everything. What it tries to do is to deliver the highest value as quickly as possible. That is the whole essence of Scrum. So it's not about the quantity, it's all about the quality, the right level of information, the right level of solutions that is needed for the customer, and they're trying to deliver it really fast. And if you look at Scrum framework, I think that's the whole essence of Scrum thinking. And the entire Scrum framework kinds of stays on 3 pillars called transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So if you look at the Scrum framework, the entire framework is dependent on transparency, inspection, and adaptation. What it really means is like you look at how you do things. You always try to do things in a better way all the time. So you inspect how you did this, and then you try different things the next time, and you always adapt. So it's always in a circle where you inspect and adapt, and you always try to improve. And that kind of relates to the complex systems theory as well. Like, I was talking a lot about emergent practices, if you can remember, evolving practices. And if you want to have, rather than a best practice, if you really want to have emergent practices or evolving practice, you need to always inspect and adapt. You need to do things in a different way all the time to make sure that you are continuously improving. So that's what the Scrum framework is all about. And to look at the things in a more open way and to adapt accordingly, you really need to have the transparency on the teams, on the environments that you work in. As so transparency means, transparency comes in with different values, and Scrum has something called 5 core values: openness, courage, respect, commitment, and focus. And for a Scrum team to work in a really good way, they need to have the transparency, and this is how you achieve transparency. If you really want to achieve transparency in a Scrum environment, in a Scrum surrounding, you really need to have these 5 core values. You need to be open with your colleagues. You need to have the courage to, do the work. You need to respect each other, no matter whether their opinions are different. You need to respect those things. You need to have a genuine commitment on the work that you do, to you and to your colleagues and to your teams. And you need to be focused on what you do as well. So if you look at the Scrum framework, it has 3 pillars: transparency, inspection, and adoption. And it has 5 values, which is openness, courage, respect, and commitment. And having those 5 values will lead a team to be transparent. And if the team is transparent, they can always inspect and adapt and make improvements all the time. And that's the kind of basic essence of the Scrum framework. And I will just skip this slide, and I'll just start explaining the Scrum framework a little bit. And if you look at the overall Scrum process, if you look at the entire Scrum, overall process, it starts from someone called a product owner. A product owner is the person who will take input from the end users, the customers, the team, and the stakeholders. And the product owner would be the person who will look at what needs to be delivered and why do we need to deliver the solution like that. So the product owner would be the person who will get input from the users, the customers, the team, and the stakeholders. And the product owner will create something called a product backlog. And the product backlog is owned by the product owner, and the product backlog is prioritized by the product owner. Prioritized means, like, the most important thing that the team needs to do would be at the top of the backlog, and the least important thing would be at the extreme bottom of the product backlog. And the product owner is responsible to get the inputs and then maintain the product backlog and create the product backlog items. Those are called PBIs, or product backlog items. And then we have something called a dev team. Dev team will have software engineers, business analysts, and tech writers, QA engineers, whoever. The dev team is the team who has the competence on actually implementing the software, or rather developing the software. And what they do is they will look at the product backlog, and they will do something called sprint planning, or they have something called a sprint planning meeting. What they do is they look at the product backlog starting from the most important, starting from the top, and then they will select how much that they can take into a short development cycle. So they can't decide what they can take in. They need to always start from the top of the product backlog. They don't have choice there. But then they can decide how many items that they can take in during a sprint, simply because they are the people who gets involved in doing the actual development. So because of that, the team will decide how much that they can take into a sprint, and then they create something called a sprint backlog. And the sprint backlog is something that the team will focus on during a sprint. A sprint is actually a short feedback loop where the team will focus on a short amount of the backlog and try to implement those backlog items fully. And they will work in something called a sprint. And normally in Scrum terms, sprint duration of a sprint would be either 4 weeks or less than 4 weeks. Normally, in most cases, the common practice would be for the teams to use 2-week sprints, but a sprint can be from 1 to 4 weeks. And during that period, the sprint period can be 4 weeks, or it can be 3, 2, or 1. During the sprint cycle, the team will only focus on the sprint backlog, and they will make sure that they complete the sprint backlog items during that short period of time. So they will keep the focus on their sprint backlog and then do it. And once the sprint is over, and during the sprint, there is another person called a Scrum Master. Scrum Master is actually the person who will help the team out to decide and agree on how they work together to get this software developed. So the Scrum Master's main job role is to make sure that help the team on how we do things. So if you look at the product owner, it's the what and the why. Product owner decides what needs to be done and why it's needed, and the Scrum Master helps the team to define how they do things. So for how, it's the Scrum Master. For the what and the why, it's the product owner. And the team will focus work in a sprint. And during a sprint, they have something called a daily Scrum meeting, or also this is called as daily stand-up meeting, where the team gets together every day at the beginning of the work, and they try to look at the things that are in progress, and they try to help each other out by looking at the challenges that they have. They try to share their knowledge, and they have a kind of weekly short sync meeting every day that is called the daily Scrum or the daily stand-up meeting. And also they have something called the product backlog grooming meeting, where the team members, the dev team members, will help the product owner to maybe make certain clarifications on the product backlog on certain technical aspects and certain functional aspects of it as well. So for that, because of that, they get involved in something called this product backlog grooming meeting. And at the end of the sprint, the team will provide a potential shippable product. So the outcome of a sprint would be actual piece of working software that can be used by the customers in their environment. So at the end of a sprint, there should be a potential shippable software that is being completed. And once it's done, there are 2 different ceremonies that are happening in a team as well. First one is called the sprint review, or it's called the sprint demo in some context as well. It's the same thing. A sprint review would be the place where the team and the stakeholders, together with the product owner, look at your solution, look at your software solution, and critically review and try to make improvements on your solution, the product that you're going to ship. So that is the purpose of having the sprint review. And then there is another ceremony, or rather a kind of a meeting called sprint retrospective, or sometimes people used to call it the retro meeting, the retrospective meeting. That is a meeting where all the team members only get together, and they look at how they have been developing the software, and they always try to look at making improvements on the way they do software, or on the way they develop software. So if you look at the sprint review, it's about the product, and when it comes to the sprint retrospective meeting, it's about how we develop the product. So always what a kind of a Scrum team does is actually they always try to make improvements per sprint on the product and also the process, the product and the process. So the product and the process keeps on evolving all the time in a Scrum team. And if I may revert it back to the Agile concepts, or even the Scrum values, we were talking about inspection and adaptation. And the Scrum team will always inspect and adapt on the product and also on the process. So, I mean, if you look at Scrum, if you look at the Scrum framework, in just one single slide, I think you have all the different artifacts that is relevant to Scrum framework. And if you are more interested, you can always go to a website called scrumalliance.com, or you can just, and there's another site called scrum.org. And those 2 are the kind of 2 governing bodies for Scrum. And you can always Google for something called Scrum, Scrum guide. And there will be a kind of guide that it's publicly available, and you can read the Scrum guide, and it explains all the different artifacts, and also, the definitions and everything is there. Just Google for Scrum guide and you'll get the Scrum guide, the latest Scrum guide, and you can get all the detailed information about the different things like the sprint retrospective, Scrum Master, product backlog, all the different artifacts. And here, I have just visualized all the stuff that is relevant to Scrum.
So do you ever experience project failure under Scrum or any Agile method?
Yes, a direct answer would be yes. Again, having a software development process, whether it's Scrum, Agile, waterfall, whatever, does not mean that the project will be successful all the time. No, I mean, there are situations where, the projects have failed even in Agile approach. And if I just, if I just go back to, for example, I just share this, state of the Agile survey results. Like, again, you can just, Google for this as well now. There are things like, accelerate software delivery, manage change in priority, increase priority, better business IT alignment, increase software quality. All these things are good things, but, none of these things are 100%. If it's 100%, we can say like, all the projects are successful. So since it's less than 100, in any company, that's a reality. I mean, there are situations where the projects were failures. And I mean, that's the reality, and we can't have 100% success rate all the time. And only thing is like what we can do would be we can sometimes mitigate the risk that we have, and sometimes we can maybe find solutions. And also just going back to your question, like if you look at the projects that have failed, I mean, there can be different reasons, and one major reason for an Agile process to fail would be, again, it's the people who gets involved. If the people did not have the right mindset, if the people had their own agendas, it's gonna fail all the time. And also another important fact would be like, Agile comes in with a lot of visibility. You need to make sure that, you make the progress of the project visible all the time. If you try to, hide the progress until the end, what's going to happen is like, until the end, people will never understand whether the project is going in the right direction or not. So if you have a lack of visibility, there is a high chance that a project is going to fail. And if you look at Agile projects, the failed Agile projects also, the two major reasons that I would see would be the mindset of the people, the intention of the people. That's the main hurting factor. And then the second one would be the visibility. If the visibility is low, there is a high chance of a project failure. If the visibility is high, there is a better chance of being a project successful. Another reason for another importance of having the visibility would be like, if the things are visible, even if the project is is not doing well, that will be visible at the very beginning of the project. And if at the beginning of the project you can see that the project is not going in the right direction, you have ample of time to look at that and make adjustments. But if that is not visible until the end, people will never know whether the project is on track or not. And by the time that they realize the project is not in track, it's too late for them to change it. Demand of Agile in industry. Okay, the demand of Agile in the industry. Well, I mean, if you join a company in the industry, and if the company is relatively big, I mean, there has to be some kind of software development process that they follow, right? Because I mean, if you join a very small company where you have around like the maximum of 10, 12 developers, maybe the processes are not so important for them because probably they have just one single customer and maybe they have just one single team working on the customer. But if you look at a very large organization where you have around 1,000 developers, spans who sitting all over the globe, sitting in different locations, and if you have big customers, trying to get large scale enterprise software, then those organizations really need processors. And again, that all depends on the how you interpret the demand. Like if you are really planning to join a kind of a relatively big company, then getting some idea, having a knowledge on the way the teams work, getting an idea about the software development processes will definitely serve you, and there is a high demand for that. But let's say again, if your intention is to join a startup or maybe a small company, then maybe the focus on process would be relatively less. But if that company becomes successful, if that company starts growing, then they will also have a need of looking at better processes as well. And if you look at the software development process, if you look at the industry, I mean, just Google for the state of the Agile survey report and look at the number of companies, and they have given the statistics, the numbers where the company. I mean, if you look at global companies, Fortune 500 companies, how many companies are using Agile or some kind of flavor of Agile? And if you look at the results there, I mean, more than 90% of the companies in the industry now uses some flavor of Agile in their business. I mean, that gives a kind of clear, understanding about, the demand of Agile and the use of Agile in the software development context as well. So if I may ask, answer your question, there is a really good demand. And again, that might depend on the context that the company is in as well. Any more questions? Yeah.
So is Kanban methodology under Scrum or something?
Yes, Kanban is not under Scrum. Kanban is also an Agile methodology, kind of Agile, that falls under Agile. And Kanban is actually a kind of, if you look at Scrum, for example, Scrum framework is actually mainly intended in a situation where you do software development for customers. Now, let's say you have a customer comes in with a requirement, and what you do is you put a team together and you try to understand the customer's requirement, and then you start developing something. You start developing a piece of software for the customer use. So if you look at pure software development, Scrum framework suits the best. And let's say if you are in a business where you provide services, it can be in terms of different things. Like, let's say, for example, if you are providing infrastructure service, or if you're providing, let's say, you do have a product that was released to a customer and the customer has been using the product for a long time, and now the customer comes back to you with bugs on the system, or maybe comes back to you with enhancements to the product that you have given it. Then it's more like a service organization. Then you provide lots of services there. Then, if you are in a situation where you provide lots of services, Scrum framework might not be the best Agile framework that can be used there. And Kanban would be ideal for such situations. So Kanban framework is actually more suitable for teams who are providing services to the stakeholders. And Kanban itself is also an Agile, software development process. And, but more suited for, things like service organization. Like, for example, let's say, if you take an organization like Dialog, and if they are providing mainly services to you, maybe in their teams, using Kanban approach might be good. But let's say if they are developing a new product, or, maybe a new, last mile fiber connection or whatever new product, then those teams will start using a Scrum approach. But if you already have a product and you provide services, then Kanban would be the ideal approach. And when it comes to Kanban, when it comes to Scrum, we talk a lot about product owners, Scrum masters, product backlog, sprint reviews, and Kanban, there are different sets of terms like, work in progress limits, visualizing the workflow, converting from a push system to a pull system. There are different terms that's associated with Kanban, but still Kanban itself is also a framework that is more suitable for support organizations.
How we can prove whether we have Agile or Scrum skill to industry as a internal fresh graduate?
It's okay. If you want to prove, it's there can be like two different scenarios. One would be like, there are things like certifications that you can do, professional certifications. Now, if you just go to, again, I was talking about the Scrum Alliance site. So if you go to Scrum Alliance site, there are certifications like, certified Scrum Master, certified Scrum Product Owner. And, from that, qualification onwards, there are different paths that you can take in. Like, if you become a certified Scrum Master, you can be a certified Scrum Professional, then you can be a team coach, and you can be enterprise coach. So there are different levels. And some of the certifications, yes, you can do. And, there are different, and also there's a really good website called, Agile Alliance, agilealliance.com. And you can just go to that site, and they do have sometimes small webinars, small short courses as well. And, taking part on some of those courses will, maybe get you to some kind of, proof saying that, you have some kind of qualification. But, there's a but part also, one kind of sad thing over there is actually when it comes to those certifications, some of those certifications are a little bit expensive because of the demand, because of the higher demand in the industry. Those certifications have become a bit expensive. That is the kind of downside of that little bit. But then if you really want to expand the horizon of your knowledge, there are so many meetups. For example, if you are familiar with the concept of meetups, there's a site called meetups.com. You can just, there are so many different meetups that are happening, who are conducted by like-minded people who are experts on this area free of charge. So what they do is like, they take a particular topic, like for example, let's say planning and estimation. In Scrum context, how you do planning, that might be a topic. And then they have 2-3 hour session getting together, trying to share their experience, trying to listen to the others. So it's more like learning from the community. So there are events happening like that, but then those might not help you to prove that you have a qualification, but those things will definitely help you to get the knowledge that you have. And also, again, like even if you want to prove that you have a knowledge, there are two aspects. Like you need to, even in an interview, you need to prove two different things mainly. One thing would be probably you need to prove that you have the knowledge, but then you need to prove that you have the skill. And knowledge and skill are two different things. Knowledge means something that you have gained or something you know, but the skill is actually the way that you prove that you have the ability to apply the knowledge that you have in the practical context. And even if you have really good grades, even if you have really good memory on the theory and everything, if you can't apply those things into practical context, you can't prove that you have the right skills. And that is exactly why sometimes in an interview, there are different questions that comes along to you. It's not just to know whether you have the knowledge, because if you have a good grade, if you have a good GPA, you have proven that you have the knowledge. But you need to prove that you are able to apply the knowledge that you have into practical. So that's where the skill comes in. And if you take Agile also, it's the same thing. And proving that you have the knowledge would be something through maybe certifications, but understanding those things and trying to map it to real context, that's the skill. And that cannot be achieved just by doing a certification. That needs to be achieved through experience, through exposure, by talking to people, by trying to understand the business context and so many different things. So always try to look at both the aspects, the knowledge and the skill. Both is equally important. There is a question called, can I know what software like Jira do use in the industry level, which relevant Agile SCRUM? Okay, Jira itself is actually a issue tracking system. Issue tracking system is actually now when you have a large organization where you have lots of people working together on the same development, there has to be a way where you can track the progress of the work that you do and the challenges and everything. And Jira itself is actually a tool, just a tool that can be used for this. But one good thing with Jira is actually Jira supports Agile way of working a lot. Because of that, the tool is kind of optimized for Agile. Whether you take a Scrum approach, a Kanban approach, Jira suits the best, and Jira has different modes, like for Kanban modes and for Scrum modes, there are different modes. So because of that, you can use this tool in Agile context real well, but it does not mean that Jira is only for Agile teams. No, it can be used in any context, even for service organization, it can be used. But Jira is well suited for Agile context, so Agile teams. And it's developed by an Australian company called Atlassian, and they have so many other products together with Jira as well.
So,
yeah.
So can you explain how beginner with no experience with the Agile methodologies, how he can adapt to the Agile environment in some organization? What is your suggestion for him?
Adapting again comes in with the right mindset. Now, let's say if you do not have any idea about what Agile means, if you don't have any idea about what it really means, and if you just join an environment where it's an Agile environment, I don't think that you have to be scared, because Agile is all about having the right mindset. And if you really join into Agile environment, the mindset that the others should have also, let's say if they get a colleague who does not know anything about Agile, they should be willing to share that knowledge with that person. They should be willing to go that extra mile and help that person out to gain that knowledge. So again, if you just get into an environment where the environment is Agile, if the environment is truly Agile, you don't have to be scared you don't have to be scared by not knowing Agile, because they will anyway help you out to be Agile. And if you join an environment where you don't know Agile and they claim to be Agile and they're not helping out, that means that environment is actually not Agile. So then, even knowing Agile does not, serve bad to you as well. That's how I see it. But of course, again, if you look at your journey, if you take IT industry, our journey is, it's always a learning journey. And, we should be willing to learn things all the time. And I mean, it's perfectly fine to join an agile environment where you don't have anything, you don't have any idea, but of course you should be able to catch up quite fast. And for that, you need to have the right mindset and the intention of, learning. That's the only two things that you need to bring. That's it, I would say. Okay, there is another question around Agile. Can you explain what the importance of Agile for a QA engineer? I mean, again, if you are a QA engineer, you will end up being a part of a team somewhere down the line when you join the industry. And again, when I mentioned about the team, also I mentioned, like, a dev team will have software engineers, QA engineers, BAs, business analysts, and even technical writers. So if you just end up in a team, and even if you are a QA engineer, even if your specialty is on QA, you will be part of a dev team, which means like you need to work together with the software engineers and BAs and all the other people, which means, knowing software development processes will equally have an important for a QA engineer as well as software engineer. I mean, it doesn't really matter whether you are a software engineer or a QA engineer or a BA, the importance would be equal, because anyway, you will be working in a team with a bunch of people with different skills on an agile environment. If there is a case, then the importance would be the same.
What skills IFS expects from intern software engineers?
Intern software engineers, are you referring to, like, maybe in your third year you need to take an internship and you need to join? Is that what you are referring to, or are you referring to a fresh graduate who joins the industry?
Yes, we have to go in third year, second semester to industry.
Internship. Okay, right. So when it comes to an internship, again, that slightly depends on the landscape that we are in. Because now, for example, let's say, if you apply for an internship, maybe let's say right now, depending on the projects that we have, depending on the kind of, depending on the amount of pressure that we have in the organization at that particular point of time, we might make a decision, okay, this is the amount of interns that we can cater, and probably, it can be high, it can be low, depending on the workload that we have. Because, when we get an intern into the organization, normally, we might not get anything out from that intern, but rather we try to help them out. So we are always willing to help the industry, the community, and we are always willing to help especially the education system or the universities. But then again, there has to be a balance with the work that we do and the impact that we have on the work that we do as well. So because of that, there can be limitations on the number of interns that we get. And also what we do is actually, we try to give equal opportunity for everybody in the country, which means like, we will not try to focus on just particular university or a particular faculty. Rather, we try to give opportunity for all the different universities as much as we could. And because of that, when it comes to, quality, so the expectations of an intern, I mean, we do not look at a lot, because anyway we are not going to recruit them as permanent employees, but it's just like trying to help them out. So because of that, we do not look a lot about the skills or the knowledge. But again, like, for example, let's say, if you have 10 vacancies and, if there are, 100 who has applied, we have to be fair on the people who have applied, and we have to be fair on the people who get selected as well. And because of that, there has to be some kind of a criteria to select those people. So because of that, sometimes depending on the amount of people that has applied, we will try to pick the people who have the best knowledge and the skills on the work that they claim that they know. Like, for example, let's say, if you are an intern and if you apply for internship, and when you're called for interview, when if you say that I have programmed in Java and I haven't programmed in C#.NET, you won't get questions around C#, because then we know that you don't know C#. But you will get questions on Java because you claim that you know Java. And if you can prove that you know that, then it's fine. But even though when you join IFS, probably you will never work with Java. Maybe you will work with something else, but that's fine, because then you have proven that you have the skill that you claim that you have. So that's fine. So again, because of that, that varies time to time. And also the other thing is, like, now, even if you get an intern, that intern will be treated as a normal employee, and that intern will be most likely will be put into a team, which means like, the team will need to maybe take care of that intern. Because of that, if those interns have the wrong attitudes, the interns have the wrong mindset, that will have an impact on the team that the intern will put into. So because of that, we will definitely look at the the mindset, the attitude, and the behavior of the interns as well. So we look at two aspects, again, the behavior and the skills. But the skills, again, the reason why we look at skills is not because that we want to assess those skills. It's because, like, there are so many people who are applying for the internship, and we have to be fair on the people that we pick. Because of that, we are just looking at the skills. Again, you don't have to be skilled at something that you don't know. It's more like, if you learn the things in a good way, the things that you learn at the university, that's more than enough. Then you can, in an interview, you can say, okay, I have done programming in Java and I'm good at Java, and I know about networks. Then you can just, that's fine. And there will be questions around that. But then again, when it comes to attitude, behaviors, I think that's a must. Like, if you do not have the right behaviors, if you don't have the right attitudes, most likely you will not get selected, unfortunately. That's how it is. Because again, I just explained the what and also why we do it. Like, again, if we get people with the wrong behavior, it's not about that individual. It will have an impact on the entire team. Because, I mean, one really important thing that all of you need to keep in mind would be like, now, when you are undergraduates, and during your university career, if you do not behave well, or if you do not you used to call like how to say it, if you screw yourself up, for example, the impact would be on you. Like, you will get bad grades, you will not be able to get your degree, so the impact would be on you, right? That's the maximum that you can get. But let's say if you join a company, and if you screw yourself up, it's not only you who's going to be impacted. It's the team that you work with, it's your group that you work with, and also the company that you work to. So if you screw things up in a professional context, if you screw things up in a business context, the impact would be higher. Impact would be on everybody. So because of that, getting the people with the right mindset, getting the people with the right attitude is really, really important. I mean, I can relate that even to you in your context as well. Let's say if you screw things up, if you don't study, the impact would be on you, and you get a bad grade, and that's all. But let's say, you do something really bad, like something illegal. Let's say you get caught, you get caught, keeping drugs in your possession, for example. Just a hypothetical example. Then, you will be on news sometimes, and the news item, what it might say would be, it's not that, person ABC has got caught with drugs. What the news item would say would be, a student from Sabaragama University got caught with drugs. So the impact is not only on you, the impact would be on you and your faculty and your university as well. So it's the same, like, you have to be really mindful. So if you look at the business context also, it's the same scenario. Like, if you screw things up, the impact would be really high. Because of that, again, and pivoting to the same thing, having the right mindset, having the right attitude is really, really important.